Okay, so Sophie, let me introduce Sophie Knab. She is the author, and you are from the Western New York area. So I'm really happy that that we are highlighting you in this club. So Sophie is going to give us a presentation, and then following that, we will also have a Q&A. All right, Sophie, are you ready to go?
I am ready, but before we start, is that the Jane Hanley that taught at Niagara Community College?
I think she's online.
Oh, I don't know. Looking around.
Jane, if that's you, you can unmute.
It's just the name that jumped out at me because she worked at the same place I did, but maybe it's not the same person. Well, maybe she'll catch up with us.
Okay.
I just want, before you begin, Sophie, I just want to second what Mary said, and it wasn't recorded, but it is an extraordinary book, incredibly well-researched information that I don't think one can find anywhere else except in your book. And I want to thank you for, it was a difficult read, but thank you for a really important read.
Okay, now see, you're making me emotional from the very beginning. Thank you, Mary, for those kind words. It was a true labor of love. I'll tell you all about it as we're going through some of these slides. I just want to give you an overview, and I want to tell you that I started this book because I wanted to know, I really wanted to understand my mother. Now, you know, we grow up with our parents, but I truly believe now that we don't know them unless they let us in on everything that's ever happened to them. But to start this off, I would just like always to remember both my father, who was also forced labor, and my mother through the years 1941 and 1945. This is a photo I took in our backyard. We had this shed, kind of like a little barn where, you know, at that time we had a coal burning stove in the kitchen, coal and wood. This is where we kept that wood and that coal. And this is my mom and dad on a summer afternoon, actually evening after work, my dad having his smoke. And here's the thing about this photo, you know, there's my mother eating sunflower seeds. And I never in all my growing up days saw anybody else's parents ever eating sunflower seeds. I thought, no, my parents are a little bit different, right? And they were different. And it's taken me so many years to fully appreciate them and the things that they went through by researching and writing, wearing the letter P. I also like to, you know, just say a word about my aunt, my mother's sister, who was also a prisoner at Auschwitz, taken in January 1943. Death march to Bergen-Belsen at the end of the war when they were emptying out Auschwitz, but managed to survive, but her life was short. So just a little bit about me, okay? So this is a picture of us, the four of us. We immigrated to America in 1954. And that was our very first Christmas. We arrived in April, and this was in December of 1954. And that's me and my brothers. And I still have that little Shirley Temple doll that's pictured in this photo. I've kept her all these years, and I pull her out every Christmas to remind me of our first Christmas. So my story really starts in Poland with German and Soviet invasion of Poland in 1939, I'm sorry. So you get a sense of how huge Poland is here. I mean, it extended all the way in the east into Ukraine and Lithuania. But you know, with these two invasions, they absolutely changed the geography of Poland. It changed the whole people of Poland in so many different ways. And so after Poland was occupied, it was just this orange part is just what they called a people reservoir. This is where they kept people that they wanted to send to Germany. This is where they drew people to send to Auschwitz, because Krakow was in this particular part of Poland. And this is where my mother was. My mother lived in Krakow when the war began. I have to tell you that my mother talked about her experience as a forced labor all the time to me. I was a kid, I had no point of reference. Later on, when I became older, I tried to find books about her experience. I couldn't find anything that would help me to understand the things that she was telling me. And as I got older, I started writing the things down. She'd say to me, "Oh, what are you writing?" I said, "Ma, I just don't want to forget what you're telling me." And those notes, I have the notes, you know, taken in 1980, 86, all of those notes were the basis for the beginning of my research. So Hitler's plan was that all of Poland would be slaves for him. Which one was it? Germans felt that they were a superior race, and that Poles, both Jewish and Catholic, were considered subhuman. And that philosophy was lived through because they did all of these horrible atrocities committed against the people of Poland. All of Poland, its men, women, teens, and even children became a part of the inhumane system of slave and forced labor, either in concentration camps, which got a lot of attention even right after the war, or as forced laborers, which did not get any attention because it had become now under the rule of Russia and communism, and there was no free speech for them to tell about, you know, what happened to them. The Nuremberg trials after the war, a big source of information for me that I had to dig and find, and I'm forever grateful to every librarian I've ever worked with who helped me through this process. But throughout the period of occupation, the defendants, meaning, you know, the Nazis, treated civilians inhumanely, imprisoned them without legal process, tortured and murdered them. There was no one to gainsay them, to say, you know, you can't do this, because they did all of it. So I try and give people a little heads up, the differences. Forced labor, generally people like my mother and father who were civilians, taken involuntarily against their will. They had no rights, but they received some pay. And when I say some pay, it was enough to buy stamps to send letters home to Poland. And slave labor, which has received a lot more attention, were the concentration camp victims, the political prisoners. And if you escaped from forced labor, if you left, you were sent to concentration camps. Involuntary, no rights, no pay. And a lot of times people use the terms interchangeably, but there was a significant difference. In slave labor concentration camps, there was no desire to keep people alive. In forced labor, they wanted the people alive to keep on working. So when Hitler invaded Poland, all Poles, everyone was required to register for work. You know that sign over Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei, right? Work makes you free. Well, what the Third Reich wanted was for everybody to work for the Third Reich. Everyone. You had to register, and in order to get food stamps, you had to register. If you wanted to feed your family, if you wanted to get food, you had to register. And once you registered, they knew everything about you, where you lived, who your extended family was, what your skills were as a worker, how much land you owned, et cetera, et cetera. Here's an Horodowicz book. Everybody had to have an Horodowicz book. If you didn't have one, then you know what? You were easy prey to be sent to concentration camps, slave labor camps, because you were not working for the Third Reich, and that's what they wanted. So initially, you know, there are thousands of Germans poured into Poland and started taking over all the offices, all of the government facilities, closing schools, doing what they wanted to do with Poland, and that is to make it a slave country to Germany. First, they tried to get people to volunteer, and nobody was that foolish, because in the past, what had happened, and my mother always told me this story too, about her father went to Germany to work and made extra money and then would come back to Poland. So there was that history, but now it was wartime and people did not want to leave their families to go and work in a foreign country. So this is a propaganda poster, you know, trying to get people to go to work. Oh, look how sunny and bright it is, everybody's happy. And it was really all bogus. So when they couldn't get people to volunteer to work, and I remember that the war broke out in September of 1939, and all of the crops still had to come in, the important potato crops and beet crops, you know, the pumpkins, the turnips, you know, so there was very few people, men left in agriculture to bring in the crops, because now they were part of Hitler's military might. So they were desperate to bring people in, to bring in harvests. And so when nobody volunteered, they started rounding them up on the streets, coming out of church. They would cordon the church off during the mass, during the service. And when people came out, everybody had to show their workbook. If they didn't have a workbook, they immediately were sent against their will as they stood in the clothes that they were in, and began the process to send them to Germany. At any point, you see, when my mother was telling me all this stuff, I had, as I mentioned, no frame of reference to understand. I've never lived in an occupied country. I have no idea. I mean, I've grown up, I've lived in America where you can walk down the street and everybody is, you know, minding their own business. But in Poland, in occupied Poland, any German, whether military officer or just a German citizen who's working in Poland now, could say to anyone, "What's in your bag?" If you were caught with any kind of contraband, anything that wasn't legal in terms of food stamps, you were immediately sent to a concentration camp. It was brutal, a brutal time for the people of Poland. Cameras were forbidden, but that didn't stop people from taking secret pictures of people being rounded up, taken against their will in these open bed trucks, and being sent to the next step, which is, you know, the transit camps. So here it is. This is a photo of people on the way to the train station. Now you see there's guards there, people having all of their possessions, whatever it is that they're taking, in a pillowcase or in a suitcase. And that was all that they were allowed to take, just basic things. And you were lucky if you were caught up in one of those roundups and a family found out about it and they could bring you something, because they held people temporarily in jail. And there you go, you're sent right to a waiting spot and a roundup of Poles to be deported to forced labor in Germany. So these are this photograph was from the New York Public Library. I mean, when you're writing a book, especially nonfiction, it's chaos at the beginning. You don't know where to start, where to jump in. You've got like 10,000 ideas popping out at you. You don't know how to sort it all out. And then, sometimes suddenly you get a source and you find these photographs that gives you this eyeball picture of what that must have looked like. Thousands of people, like in this photo, just waiting to get shipped to Germany, guarded and shot if people tried to escape. So this is my mom, and this picture is taken in Krakow. And see, that was another thing that I just couldn't figure out, that here it is, she's in an occupied country, but you know what? Life, I found out, moved on. People went grocery shopping, people tried to, take care of their kids. And my mother had her photograph taken. Now, my mother, I can tell my mother made this dress because, the seams are uneven. You can tell by the inserts at the sleeves, they're not perfect. My mother, it's wartime. You could hardly get any clothes. You couldn't get stamps. It was another thing. Shoes, clothes required another kind of a stamp. And people rarely got that. But on the back of the photo, and that's the thing I try and tell a lot of people now, that when you take photos, write something on the back so that people know. And it's thanks to the note that my mother wrote on the back that I knew, when she was still in Krakow. And then later on, I found out exactly the dates based on the archives in Arelson. But my mother must have had a feeling that she was going to get picked up. Up to that point, my mom had been working for a fabulously rich woman as a housekeeper. She answered the door, she cooked, she cleaned. She would tell me all this stuff. The woman was an American citizen, but of Polish descent. Her father had been some kind of an ambassador to America, and she was born in America, so she was an American citizen. So my mother felt kind of safe working for this woman, that she wouldn't be troubled, but that turned out not to be true. So my mother's job was to answer the door. I answered the door. The stories my mother would tell me over and over again. I was in my house slippers. There stood two men, with their guns. I'll never forget it. Józefa Zalewska, my mother's name. Yes, you are to come with us. I'll go and put on my shoes, my mother says. She goes, and they tell her, no, you'll be back shortly. Well, they took my mother in her house slippers, and my mother never saw Poland again in her lifetime. Yeah, that's what they said. I'll be back shortly, but she never saw Poland again after that. So one of the things in terms of writing this book was trying to find information and details. And, it took me 14 years to write this book, because this was really, I started before the major internet boom, before everything was, Googled, and it was all old-fashioned footwork, going to libraries, searching, trying to find a foothold in what you were exploring. So of course we go to Poland. My husband and I go to Poland, and I knew what area my mother had lived in. I was trying to find what jail she had stayed in. And, they were very, very nice in Poland. There was a jail not too far from Juliusz, where my mother was working for this woman. And so I go to this prison, which is now a museum, and there are jail cells. And on the walls, people have written their graffiti, right? And not graffiti, they have left their mark. And, I'm telling you, this was, now what, 2005? And they've saved these inscriptions from, the wartime, 1939 to 1945. And these women left their mark. Irka is short for Irene, right? She's from Sadibi. She writes down there, she's there from December 2nd to December 5th, 1944, before she's being sent from prison. They usually made a big bunch of people and sent them out. And, people drawing the Polish eagle, writing, I'm in despair, na rozpaczy, I'm in despair. I'm telling you, honest, cross my heart, I was crying in this jail cell. I mean, the woman was so moved. They're so nice at these museums. She says, oh, you're so upset. She says, oh, let me make you a cup of tea. I'm telling you, she was really trying to help me feel better, because I was just seeing the visible proof of what women had gone through. And it was achingly sad, just achingly sad. After they had rounded up enough people, they sent them to what was called a transit camp, a temporary camp, before they were sent to Germany. And you can see here, everybody's being guarded, no escapees. They shot you on the spot. So my mother, of course, as I mentioned, she talked about it all the time, and she remembered very well. And part of my, I don't know what it was, part of my research, I would think, is it true? Is it true what she was telling me? I had no other point of reference. I had no book to refer to. I had nothing to go on, but she would tell me names of places, street names. So she would say, after they picked me up, I went to Wąska Street, which is a street in Kraków. So as I said, this was before GPS and all of this explosion that we fortunately have had since then. So I have a map of Kraków. My husband and I are walking around looking for this street, and we find Wąska Street. I said, oh my God, this is it. And I'm thinking, this looks like a building. This doesn't look like a transit camp, but we're walking all around, and then I see this sign on the side of the building. And the sign says that this building was a major center for exporting people from the Kraków area to Germany. And it says essentially in Polish, in this region, 1939, 1944, it was a transit camp where people were sent to Germany, where they were starved and tortured, and many of them murdered. And this, for me, validated that my mother's memory and what she told me was on target. Because all those years later, now I'm grown up, and I'm actively pursuing this, and I had my notes, and sure enough, what she had been telling me was true. And then I felt this awful guilt about doubting what she was telling me. I was doubting it, but then all of the literature that I read in Polish validated what she was telling me. And I was terribly sad that I had ever doubted her. Women were being sent to Germany from, like, for instance, the Warsaw Uprising, where women were sent to Ravensbrück, which was the major concentration camp opened specifically for Polish women. And so this was a concentration camp in the Third Reich, in Germany, sending hundreds and thousands of women, where, of course, we know the horrible things that happened in the concentration camps. So they're starved and worked to death in horrible conditions. So Pruszków was another transit camp, and it was in an old locomotive factory. if you can imagine where old locomotives come in to die, you know, it was not fit for human habitation. And they made these transit camps in these horrific places because they didn't care about the Polish people. They didn't care about whether there was sanitation for them. You know, like that high school I was showing you about, that Volska Street, you know, that was a high school for Jewish students. It was meant to, you know, the facilities were for 100 students, not thousands of people coming through. And the stories, you know, the women in the transit camp said it was some of the most humiliating, horrible experiences. And let me just backtrack a second, because, you know, my mother would tell me a lot of stuff if she was wanting to talk, if she wanted to tell me stuff. But I knew she was censoring a lot of stuff. But one day, now mind you, I'm a grown woman, I'm married, I've been a nurse for many years, so there's a lot of things that I have seen, okay? And she says to me, we were in the kitchen doing something, and she says to me, she says, you know, she says, we had to stand naked in front of these doctors and these generals. I go, what? Now, I had not heard this from her at all. And to this day, I am so sorry that I reacted in such a surprised manner, because it closed her off. She didn't want to talk about it. And even I begged her, I said, Ma, I says, I'm a grown woman now. I can hear these things. I understand these things. Oh, no, needs nothing. And she says, and then she changed the subject. She didn't want to talk about it. And if we look at this picture, I mean, here's this woman with 2 children in what looks like a horrible, horrible living conditions. And these were just the transit camps. Concurrently at these transit camps, very often, you know, Hitler was losing a lot of men on the front. There had been a fair amount of German immigration to Poland, and he wanted to take back anyone who may have had German blood. And so these young children were examined at the transit camps, right? That woman was there with her child. They were examined. And if they fit some kind of code, some kind of criteria based on facial, it was bizarre stuff. But here, the photograph captures these children being examined. Are they Aryan enough? Are they German enough? And if they are, we're going to take these children and send them back to Germany to be raised as Germans. Willy-nilly, these children were taken from their moms involuntarily. I cannot imagine what must have been going on in these transit camps. I have no, it gives me chills just to think about it. And here we see Polish babies just being taken from their moms and placed in these baskets and sent to Germany, where they were raised by German families. For instance, this Barbara Paciorkiewicz, she was 4 years old when she was taken. I guess she was deemed to be Aryan enough. She was placed with a family, and she was placed with the Rossmann family. But after the war, right, the family found her and claimed her back. Her story is so interesting because as a 4-year-old, you know, you cling to the person who is kind to you, nice to you, takes care of you. And she tells openly, she remembers not wanting to go back to her Polish family. And, you know, thousands and thousands of children were never recovered after the war because of this policy. And, you know, I think about this sometimes, that there are people in Germany, probably my age, maybe younger still, who think that they're German. And maybe they really are Polish, because all traces of their former selves was eradicated, was destroyed. These were the kinds of things that were going on. So forced labor, Mariana Joandek at a camp in Austria in 1943. Hidden under the woolen blanket, she holds her son, who was born still in Poland in July 1943. So initially, they were taking only women, single women, healthy women who could work. But as the war dragged on, as Hitler invaded the Soviets and was losing on a lot of fronts, he was taking everyone, man, woman, and child. Here we see them getting ready to be, and this is Prushkov, another one of those transit camps. I see women and children here. All the men have either escaped to the forests to be in the underground army, or the men have been shot, or the men are in concentration camps or dead because what? They outright shot people for black marketing, for any minor infraction that would be an offense to the Third Reich. People loaded up in cattle cars and shipped to the Reich. Here's this is a propaganda photo, okay? Because you can't tell me, it is a propaganda photo because it says, but you know, you can't be in a cattle car for 3 or 4 days with a bucket for, you know, taking care of your personal needs, no way to wash, no way to do anything, and come out looking this great on arrival to Germany. But, you know, they kept up a very, very active propaganda machine that would, you know, belie everything that they were doing. So they show this nice picture of people, you know, who are arrived in Germany and are going to be really happy working in Germany. Everybody in Germany had to have a work card with their picture, with their fingerprints. You know, at the transit camps, I don't know if people remember this from the book, but at the transit camps, there were people, everyone was registered at the transit camp. They knew exactly where you were from, who your family was. The form was done in triplicate. Everybody knew everything about you. And, you know, the picture was to make sure that there was no shenanigans going on, the fingerprints, they could track you down anytime that they wanted to. And if they couldn't find you, if you left the transport or escaped the transport, they would come and they would find your family and they would take your family in your place and send them to forced labor or to concentration camps. Here's an Ausweis. My mother talked about Ausweis. It was a picture ID that allowed you to enter the factory. And this one was in Berlin. Now, my mother was shipped to a place called Unterlies, to an armaments factory, right? What keeps a war going? Bullets, missiles, bombs. That's what keeps a war going. And my mother was sent to an armaments factory. And she would tell me how she had this Ausweis. And in the morning, they left the barracks and they would walk 3 kilometers, she said, into the forest to the armaments factory, which was hidden, you know, in the forest to keep it secret, you know, to keep planes from recognizing what's being manufactured there. The March decrees, and why the book is called Wearing the Letter P. Because in March, I forget what year, I can't see it up here, male and female workers of Polish nationality employed within the Reich have to wear a badge on the right breast of each garment worn visibly. And it's so German, right? The badge had to be so square, 5 centimeters, purple, all of these. And my mother talked about the letter P and having to wear it. And but I had never seen a picture of it until I started doing this research, right? And this is the P that all Poles had to wear in Germany so that everybody could recognize they were subhuman Poles, right? The Jewish people had their star that discriminated against them. The Polish people had to wear the letter P. So anywhere in Germany that any Pole found themselves, right? All of the people were, I guess, brainwashed into believing that the Poles were subhuman, not worthy of caring for or dignity. It was just another form of discrimination. And people could deny you food in the stores. If you were to buy anything, they could do anything that they wanted with you. And so Carolina, you know what, when I found her picture, I thought to myself, there's something about this girl's eyes, you can take my picture, but not the rest of me. Wearing the letter P, this girl is young, but still, I loved the determination in her eyes and in her face. Now, just to throw in, the Poles weren't the only people who were brought to Germany. Any country that Hitler occupied, he immediately rounded up the people that weren't working but were employable and sent them to Germany. Certain countries had certain rights. The Nordic countries, the people who looked Aryan, they got preferences, but not the Slavic people, not the Ukrainians, not the Lithuanians, all of those people, or the Russians. Everybody was sent for work. And this is, Ost means east. Anybody from the east wore this kind of a badge, another form of discrimination. So what I'm trying to go through some of these really quickly so I can get to some of your questions, but what was life like? I had all of these questions that kept popping into my mind. I knew what my mother had told me, but I wanted to understand it all. So young girl, right? My father and I were taken to Germany. In Orienberg, they took my father, another infamous concentration camp. I am here by myself. I am 13 years old. I go to work. I have no family. I'm completely without clothes. Please connect me with the transport. She has family in Rembertów, which I discovered was outside of Warsaw. 13 years old, by herself. What did it look like? These barracks were thrown up overnight to accommodate these forced laborers, these people from Poland and the Ukraine and Russia, built very quickly, no thoughts of heat or cooling or nothing to make the workers comfortable, and built right on industrial sites. And later on, they got so short of room for all of these people that were coming in from all of Europe that then they were putting them up in schools and even in ships. I mean, it's bizarre. They were trying to find housing for these millions of people that were just pouring into the Third Reich, trying to keep Hitler's war machine going at full tilt. Another woman, I find myself still in the camp where conditions are wretched. The babies develop the cough. I'm in despair. The baby doesn't have food. They didn't care about her babies. Receiving half a liter of milk a day and 30 decagrams of sugar a month. My baby lies under the bed of a Ukrainian woman who is sick and has a fever. The walls are full of bed bugs, which will not let the child sleep. For the love of God, please help me save the life of my child. Here are people, so that was industry, and I tried to give a cross sense of women in different aspects of industry. They worked in hotels, they worked in restaurants, wherever workers were needed. And agriculture, of course, was a really big concern to feed the German people, feed the military. The military was first because farmers in Poland had to give up so much of their food that they raised, the milk, their chickens, their eggs, all had to go to feed the military and the people of Germany. The people of Poland themselves were starving to death, essentially, but everything had to be to feed the German people and the military. So here we have people bringing in the potato harvest. Now, I mentioned that my mother was in an armaments factory in Unterlys, which is right around the Hanover, Germany area. So you know, I'm trying to find out more about this Unterlys. The name of the armaments factory was Rheinmetall-Borsig. And how do I know that? Because my mother kept the name in her head and she kept talking about it. So I knew, okay, I knew Rheinmetall-Borsig. I looked it up one time and I found it was an armaments factory. And so we go there. And I meet this historian, and how did I meet him? I can't even remember. I can't remember. Oh, I think I sent a letter. And I met him in Unterlys, and he shared some of the photographs from that area. So I get a sense of maybe what the countryside looked like during my mom's time there, her tenure there. Here are some agricultural workers, right? We can see the pea here. They're not as visible on the other women, not on this photograph, but here we can see more of them with the letter P on the right side of their breast. We can see it on the gentleman that's standing behind them. He does have the letter P there. You got to look at these things sometimes with a magnifying glass to be able to see these letter P's. But you know, I love looking at these women. There is something about them. A couple of them don't look so happy at all. But you know, people are posing for pictures. So that's the tendency, isn't it, to give a smile. But I can't think, I mean, from reading the stories, their lives were from working from sun up to sundown. And there were all these brochures that were being circulated everywhere. How do we behave towards the Poles? Keep your distance. Don't let the Poles eat at your table. If you were caught as a German allowing a Pole to sit at your table and eat with you, you were fined and threatened with being sent to a concentration camp. That is how harsh it was. That is how hard it was. Keep the German blood pure. They did not want any Germans of the superior race mixing with people of subhuman qualities. See, it says the Poles do not belong to the German people's community. They're on the same level as alien races. And that was their philosophy for treating everyone they came in contact who was a Pole, Jewish or Catholic. If people somehow maintained a moral compass, and you know, that's another question I ask myself, is if that I had been there, if that was happening to me, could I uphold all of my Christian values, my moral compass that I was brought up with under those terribly extreme circumstances? Because this woman here says her head was shaved as punishment, and she was forced to wear a poster saying, "I was kind to the Poles. I am the worst swine in the village." So it was just another form of slavery. They had curfews, very strict curfews. They couldn't use any form of transportation, no bikes, no trains. You had to get permission. You had to have a slip. You could be stopped at any time by the police. what are you doing here? Visits of churches, regardless of faith. They did not want Polish Catholics and German Catholics in the same church, not with alien races. They couldn't go to motion pictures or theater or go to any restaurant. Essentially, they were what? They were slaves. They couldn't go anywhere. They were being held hostage and couldn't do anything. Okay, so concurrently, it was so hard for me writing this book to not get distracted by 10 million things. All of these atrocities, all of these things that were going on were so intense, that, I wanted to explore every aspect of it, but I couldn't. I was really just trying to stick to what happened to forced laborers. And here's another example. The murders at Hadamar, which was discovered after the war was over, after liberation. That's an army, US Army soldiers standing in front of this psychiatric institute in what's Hadamar. It was a psychiatric facility, and earlier during the war, Hitler had euthanized a lot of his very own people, the sick, the infirm, the disabled, what he called the useless eaters, people who ate but did not contribute in any way to the workforce. And so he had a lot of his own people euthanized. So at Hadamar, what happened was that, and I challenge you, if you are experiencing these sorts of things, not to have some sort of an emotional response to all of that. So there were Polish forced laborers who became depressed, hysterical, psychiatrically ill. They could not work, right? They couldn't attend to machines in a factory or do what they were told. So what they did, and this happened at a lot of facilities, but we know of this one, and it's documented because the US Army was there and documented the whole thing. So they sent these Polish and Russian forced laborers to this facility, okay? People who could no longer work, and simply euthanized them. They told them that they were going to get something that would help them feel better. And I went to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. I wanted, again, the evidence of this. I wanted to see for myself, and this is one of the charts that I copied, and I went through it, 496 names. I went through it line by line, looking. I highlighted who was a child, who was a woman, who was a man, right? Different color coding. Trying to get a sense, and it's not here, but I've got all of their names. I've done a million things to that list, and 476 men, women, and children were simply murdered, euthanized. There were rumors in the community. Once the American Army was there were rumors. They went and they inspected, they found these mass graves. And God bless America, the general, who was not a general, there was this physician along with that particular army group who exhumed the bodies. He wanted to make sure that there wasn't, and like they weren't tubercular, that they hadn't been like on the end stage of life anyway. He exhumed the bodies, examined them, and nobody had massive TB. All of them were fairly healthy people. But the crazy thing is that the Germans kept record of every single person that came into their building. And so there was lists of names of the people who were murdered there. And that was the list that I was looking at just a little bit earlier. They kept track of everyone, alive or dead. So pregnancy and childbirth, this chapter interested me tremendously because my mother had a child during the war while she was in that armaments factory. And that's my oldest brother, Michael. And she would tell me this, she says, oh no, she says, your brother, I had him while I was at the, in the armaments factory. And so this photo shows you now the back building, right? You see the big building in the back with the chimneys. That was the real hospital. But Polish women weren't allowed to have their children in the German hospital. They built these barracks where women would have their children. See, now a lot of women left Poland. They may have been pregnant already. They may have gotten pregnant in Germany. What is Germany going to do with these women? They want them to work. They don't want them to be distracted by their children and taking care of their children. So we see these barracks for the forced laborers. Conditions are pretty primitive, right? These were taken by a German photographer. Here's another one. You don't have to be a nurse or an expert to look at this baby with the sunken eyelids and tongue sticking out to know that it's dehydrated, right? There was this entirely planned and organized system of malnourishing Polish infants to the point where they died, and because they did not want another generation of Poles, aliens, subhumans, growing up on German soil. It was such an organized, nurseries all over Germany opened up. Women had to place their children there so they could get back to work. So after the war was over, the women complained, raised their voices. When I took the baby to Rouen was a factory where they were making Volkswagens, right? I can't hardly look at a Volkswagen without thinking of this. A woman talking about what happened. He was healthy, he weighed 6 pounds, 9 ounces. When I visited the baby 2 weeks later, the baby was, weighed only 3 pounds, 5 ounces. My supervisor told me the baby had died. Her supervisor at work tells her. When I went to the nursery, the nurse told me the baby was dead and buried, but would not tell me where. I saw dead babies piled on the table, wrapped in paper. I never saw my baby or his grave. This chapter was the hardest of all to write, the hardest of all. And it was just aching to read what some women suffered, during this time. It's unimaginable. And then, of course, the end of the war, right, comes. And we see here in this photograph what I always call, and what we hear about on the news as collateral damage, right? Ending the war. The Allies are coming in from the West. The Russians are rolling through Poland, heading towards Germany from the East. Bombs are dropping everywhere. The Americans are targeting railroad lines and armaments factories and anything to stop the production of military equipment. And what? On the ground are people working in these factories, living in these barracks. And my mother was one of them. I ran out of the barracks. This is a story that lived with my mother forever. And when she was dying, this is what I was thinking about, this story that she told me over and over again. I ran out of the barracks, my mother says, and all I could think about was your brother in the nursery, right? She had a child there. And like everybody else, she had to put him in the nursery. I hear bombs exploding, the earth shaking. From the corner of my eye, I could see other women running too, all of us heading in the same direction towards the nursery, towards our babies. I grabbed Michael so hard he started screaming. There wasn't time to think of anything except to run as fast as I could. I knew I'd be safe if only I could reach the edge of the forest. I could hardly breathe. My heart was pounding with terror. If only I could reach the trees. My mother would say that over and over again. So I'm trying to validate these experiences that my mother had, and I did. I'm face to face with that evidence. It lived in my mother's memory all her life. 57 children were killed in those bombings in Unterlys and were buried in the local town cemetery. And that 12 Polish women in childbed also died in that attack. And this was a German paper that I found. I'd been working with a German translator. I mean, you can do a few things with the dictionary, but I hired this gentleman from Oregon, and he translated German papers for me. And when he translated this for me, I said to my husband, you know what? We have to go there. We just absolutely have to go there. It is proof that what my mother was telling me was true. It was true. Here lies 4 Italians and 23 Polish children. And here lie 34 Russian children, right? A mass grave for all of those people who died as part of the collateral damage. And you know, my mother tells about the next day, you know, she spent the night in a farmhouse. She knocked on some German farmhouse door, and they let her spend the night in the barn. Now this was April; it was still cold, but she managed, and she went back the next day. And she said what she saw would never leave her memory. Children were, and I have to just remind people that by this time they were using napalm bombs. And so there's a lot of burning, and the people were burnt. She said she saw lying babies dead everywhere. It was just memory that never left her, and that she thought about a lot. The next phase after the war was in these displaced persons camps, and a lot of them took place in the same forced labor camps that they had been living in for a long time during the war, but there was no place else. I think they say there were 6 to 7 million displaced people in Germany when the war ended. That many people brought in from their homeland, and now what do? Here you are, the war is over. You know, my mother said we were like tribes. We were like this band of tribes just wondering, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? And fortunately, you know, America, God bless America, had been planning for this. The United, what was it called? United Nations Rehabilitation and UNRWA, UNNRRA, came in and started organizing people according to their ethnic groups, trying to get people, you know, trying to get water running, trying to get roads open, trying to do, you know, everything to try and give people a return to normalcy. And so in that area, Hanover, that was the area that my mom had been in, and Unterlys was close to that. There were a lot of DP camps, and my mother didn't have a tremendous amount of photos, but she really kept these photos, and she couldn't identify the people, all of them here. But of course, this is my mother, and on her lap is my second brother, Andrew, his christening, and that's my dad with the cigarette next to her. Now, so here, let's fast forward, really. These are the barracks that we lived in France. So My brother Michael was born in Germany. My brother Andy was born in Germany. I was born in Germany in 1948. But by the 1949, my parents immigrated to France to work. Europe was in shambles. Everything was destroyed. They were trying to get people up and working, and my father refused to stay in Germany. Poland was now under the communists, under the Russians. Nobody was keen on going back there. So my parents went to France. And ironically enough, my brother, when he is of age, he joins the military. And where do they send him? My brother Andy, they send him to Germany. Okay. So he's in Germany, right? And he's older than I am. So he remembered more about France than I did. So on leave one time, he hops over to France. We remembered the names. My mother remembered the names of where we were in France. And he goes back, and those barracks where we lived were still there in the 1960s. Now, they look pretty shabby, don't they? I'm telling you, they are shabby. So this was the building that we lived in. And I remember the building because it was a room in the front with a stove, a coal wood burning stove, a kitchen, sort of the living area. And in the back, there was a bedroom. And there were 3 beds for all 6 of us, because then my youngest brother was born in France as well. So we lived here, and here's a picture of us in front of this building, right? Now, this is my mom and dad, my brother Michael, that was born in the forced labor camp, my brother Andrew, who later came back and took the pictures. And this is my brother Matthew, my youngest brother, who was born in France. And here we are, all of us together. This was taken in France, and my 2 brothers are sort of dressed alike because my mother was a seamstress. She got a bolt of fabric. Everybody got the same outfit. I tell this story all the time about how when I was growing up here in America, somebody gave my mother a bolt of fabric that had dollars and coins. It was a stupid hunk of fabric, but my mother made me like 3 pairs of shorts out of those. So everybody thought I just had 1 pair of shorts, and I really had 3, but it was always the same fabric. So this is us in France. This is us then from France. We immigrated to America in 1954. God bless America. And so stories, what have I learned from all of this? Well, I've learned that my mother, what she told me was true, and her memory was very acute. It was good memory, what she told me. Stories have to be told, and my mother told me stories, or they die. And when they die, we can't remember who we are or why we're here. Sue Monk Kidd is a great writer, and I really like all of her books. And that particular line in one of her books really stuck with me. So, oops, I'm sorry. So listening to my mom's stories and what she was telling me, and my desire to know my mother better, to know her experiences. You know, my mother suffered from depression and anxiety all the time that I knew her. And I'm just not surprised. Nowadays, you know, there's a name for it. It's post-traumatic stress. Back then, nobody recognized it. Back then, people didn't talk about it. And so people just lived with their memories and their experiences. And, you know, my brothers and I talk about this. I was talking to my youngest brother, Matthew, the other day. It was his birthday. And, you know, we always circle back to the thing that it is amazing to us that despite all of those difficulties that she experienced, and my father, I have to say as well, that she was able to raise us up to be decent human beings, contributing members of society, and was proud of us, you know, to do all of that with all of that she had experienced, I think is pretty amazing. Is still, I think it is. So, you know, a lot of people, you know, to get back to Sue Monk Kidd, you know, stories are where, you know, books, I think, start to happen. Gary Suzak listened to his parents talk about World War II, and he wrote a book. I don't know if your book club has read this. It's a fabulous read. And it was made into a movie, which was also, sometimes the movies, you know, aren't as great, but this movie and this book are really part of listening to someone's stories. And another woman, Ruda Sapetis, she is the daughter of a Lithuanian refugee, and she listened to her dad's stories and wrote a book. It's called Between Shades of Gray. It's listed as a young adult book, but you know, I read young adult book. I like children's literature. I take out books out, you know, all across the board. Whatever. And it was made into a movie, Ashes in the Snow, and it was a pretty decent movie as well. But my point is that when families share stories and pass stories down, you know, they take on a life. They can take on a life of their own and become something that can be shared with other people. So last points, what's your story? I'm asking everybody who's listening, what's your story? What's your family story? Write about it, commit it to paper. As I said, I have just these random notes all over the board, made no sense until I sorted it all out. Make a family video, collect your photographs, date and name people in the photographs, read history, the period, visit places that are vital to your story, whatever it is. And, you know, and so many people say to me, oh, well, my family story isn't that interesting. You know, my father raised tobacco. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, that's an interesting story. Write about that, you know, but, you know, people, I think, minimize the importance of family stories, because I think every life story matters. My mother was one of 500,000 Polish women who were sent for forced labor in Germany, one. And I have to tell you that I receive letters from people. It's very emotional. I receive letters from people who tell me that their mom was a forced laborer and that my book has helped them to understand their mother better. And for me, that is the greatest of all accomplishments, because you know what? It helped me understand my mother better and appreciate her even more. So thank you, everyone, for listening. I've been going on and on here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. And you know, Mary asked me just to mention perhaps some of my other books. As you can see, I'm a little bit focused on Poland. that is my thing. You know, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to write. I loved writing. You know, those essays they used to give you in 8th grade English. Tell me about how you spent your summer. Remember those little essays they used to give us? Oh, I love those essays. I always did really well. I wanted to be a journalist, but my mom said, oh, honey, she says, how are you going to earn a living? And I couldn't answer it. I didn't know. So I became a nurse instead, which was a great fit for me too, because I could hear a lot of people's stories as a nurse. But my breakthrough as a writer was recognizing that I wanted to write about Poland. And the other book here was my first book. This one on customs and traditions, because we grew up very Polish, with all of the traditions. So I knew something about it, and there wasn't anything out there at all on that same topic. So I started writing about it. And the spirit of place, you know what? Yesterday I got my author copies of, this is my latest, my newest book. It's a little bit of a travel log. It's about the faith of Poland and the people of Poland and what the architecture means there. So that's a little bit of some of my books that are out there. And I have a website. If you're interested in my blog, take a look. But really, the real joy is sharing my story with all of you. And I hope that you write and share your story with all of us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sophie.